Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, members. We are ready to proceed. Mr. Commissioner, we have as our first witness this morning the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Naidu, and he is ready to take the prescribed oath.
Raise your right hand, so help me God.
I do.
Thank you.
You can be seated. You have prepared a written statement for the Commission. Thank you for that. And I also place on record that you came here voluntary. It was not necessary to subpoena you. And can I please then ask you to start your testimony by reading into the record the statement you have prepared.
To the Commission information in terms of Rule 6.2 of the Commission's rules published in Government Gazette of 15 January 2019 by way of Government Notice 42157. In what follows, I address facts under the following headings. The investigation into the affairs of VBS Mutual Bank, called the investigation, the evidence provided by Mr. Paul Magula pursuant to the investigation, and the confidentiality of the transcript attached to this affidavit. Against the backdrop of, inter alia, a severe liquidity crisis which prevailed at VBS Mutual Bank, the Minister of Finance placed VBS under curatorship with effect from 11 March 2018. On 13 April 2018, and consequent upon the initial findings of the curator, I, in my capacity of Chief Executive Officer of the Prudential Authority, appointed Terry Mutau SC as an investigator in terms of Section 134 of the Financial Sector Regulation Act for the purpose of conducting an investigation into VBS and, amongst others, Versman's attorney is represented by Mr. Bernard Hotz in terms of Section 134 of the Financial Sector Regulations Act to assist the investigator in the investigation. The primary objectives of the investigation were to establish whether any of VBS's businesses were conducted with the intent to defraud depositors and or any other creditors of VBS or for any other fraudulent purpose. VBS's business conduct involved any questionable and or reckless business practices and or material non-disclosure with or without the intent to defraud depositors and or any other creditors, and there had been any irregular conduct by VBS shareholders, directors, executive management, staff, stakeholders, and or related parties. The investigator appointed by me had the power in terms of Section 136 of the FSR Act to require an individual to appear at a specified time and place to answer questions. During the investigation, the investigator made use of his powers and conducted a series of formal interviews with numerous individuals. Subsequent to the conclusion of the investigation, and on 5 October 2018, the investigator submitted his final report to the Prudential Authority reflecting his findings and recommendations. The report, commonly known as the Great Bank Heist, was made public on 10 October 2018, save for the annexures thereto and all underlying documentation, which included the transcripts of various formal interviews held pursuant to Section 136 of the FSR Act. Since the submission of the report, all the documents and information relating to the investigation have been and remained under the control of the Prudential Authority. Mr. Magula's evidence. Mr. Magula was one of the individuals with whom the investigator held a formal interview. Such interview took place on 8 June 2018 and was recorded. A transcript of the interview was also prepared. I note that Mr. Magula submitted a statement to this commission on 11 March 2019 and also gave oral evidence at the hearing of the commission on the same date. In light of Mr. Magula's statement and evidence to the commission, and which I understand from media reports included reference to VBS, I believe that it is necessary and appropriate that the commission be provided with the transcript of Mr. Magula's formal interview obtained as part of the investigation undertaken by the investigator into VBS. This transcript may be of assistance to this commission and can be considered in the context of the statement and evidence provided by Mr. Magula to the commission.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, just for the record. The interviews conducted by Mr. Matau and his assistants, those formal interviews of witnesses, they testified under oath, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. As such, and in the interest of assisting the Commission in fulfilling its terms of reference, I attach a copy of the transcript marked PA1, which, for the reasons stated in paragraphs 15 to 17 below, the Commission is respectfully requested to keep confidential. I also attach a copy of the main part of the report, being the portion of the report which was made public and which is marked PA2. Reference is made to Mr. Magula in, inter alia, paragraphs 24, 39, 48, 49, 50, 52, 55, and 185 of the report.
The first one is 21.4. The first number is 21.4, not
yes,
24.
21.4.
Yes.
As mentioned above, whilst the main part of the report has been made public to date, the annexures and the underlying documentation thereto, which includes the transcripts and of the formal interviews, have not. The Prudential Authority wishes to retain the confidentiality of the annexures to the report and the related underlying documentation, given that it has referred this report together with its annexures and all related evidence to the law enforcement authorities for further investigation, and the Prudential Authority is concerned that the disclosure may compromise the investigation by the law enforcement authorities. In the circumstances, the Commission is respectfully requested to retain the confidentiality of the transcript attached to this affidavit by not disclosing it or any portion thereof to any third party, i.e. persons who are not chairperson, the Commission's legal team, or the Secretary, as these terms are defined in the rules and or regulations published in terms of Section 1 of the Commissions Act 8 of 1947 in relation to the Commission dated 28 November 2018, as may be the case. Thus signed and sworn, I signed the affidavit on the 14th of March, Chair.
Mr. Commissioner, can I at this stage then ask you for an order to have the annexure to be confidential and not be public and not be publicized?
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head what the position will be if by the time we deliver our final report to the President, and there's reference in the report of matters that are in the confidential document, how do we deal with those?
Mr. Commissioner, the legal position in my respectful submission would be that it can be included in the report to the President, and we'll give you the necessary authority for that, and with the request that the order of confidentiality be respected and that it remains confidential because of the investigation by the law enforcement agencies.
Okay, I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But it's only is it part PA1 that should remain confidential?
It's only Annexure PA1 that is confidential and should be ordered to be confidential and not be publicized.
It is then ordered that the Annexure PA1 should be kept confidential and not be made
as it
public.
pleases you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Naidu, you have also referred to extracts. It's not part of your affidavit, but it's been made, copies have been made and supplied to the Commission about Mr. Magula and Mr. Nsani. Can you just read that and place it on record?
Sure. The second half of paragraph 21.6 reads, as was the case with Mr. Magula and Nsani, they're referring to Palapala Ramakosi, who was a non-executive director and chair of the audit committee. As was the case with Mr. Magula and Mr. Nsane, he eventually confessed after putting up strenuous denials that he had received unlawful payments made to a nominee company for his benefit. The price for his complicity seems, however, to have been significantly lower than theirs.
Advocate, I think it would be useful for context to actually, if it is possible, to look at the document that you did submit, which would be 39.3, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, and on until, and we can go through that. I think, Mr. Mahapi, you've got a copy of that.
Yes, we do.
If we could read that into the record, because I think those are very pertinent to that. And then there is the additional part of 52.8 as well. So perhaps I think it would give us context to your statement, Mr. Naidu. Is that possible?
It is possible. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Paragraph 39.3 of the public report reads, the monthly payments of 300,000 Rand all took place on the same date each month that Vele made a distribution of monies to a variety of related parties, including Magula's front companies, Nesane's front company, and Makavu, who is the advisor to the vendor king. Each of Magula, Nesane, and Makavu admitted that there was no lawful cause whatsoever for these payments. Magula and Nesane admitted that the payments were made to them to buy their silence. Makavu described the very substantial payments made to him and the vendor king as shameful.
Are you able at that point to indicate the total amount received by Magula, Nesane, and Makavu? That would be the amounts paid plus the monthly fees that seem to have been paid. So what in total did each of those parties receive as part of this VBS matter?
Through you, Chair, Mr. Magula received about 7.6 million Rand in total. I just have to double check how much Mr. Nesane received, but it was of similar order of magnitude. If you give me 30 seconds, I'll just check on that.
Yeah, sorry, hello. Hi. Can you check your paragraph 238 in the second last page? 238 in the document. It says extent of the looting, and it starts at 235 and it goes to 238.
Perhaps given that, why don't we go through the text and then come to that as a specific item that then gets read into the record in its sequence? Because that would give you a chance to come to that and deal with it altogether. So we can go back, if that's okay with you, Commissioner. Yeah. That we do it in the sequence instead of looking at the amount now.
Paragraph 48 reads, 3 of the non-executive directors of VBS, being Magula, Nesane, and Ramakosi, all confessed that they had been rewarded in an improper manner. Paragraph 49 reads, Magula, after first giving a great deal of false evidence in this regard, eventually found himself constrained to retract his prior evidence and to seek immunity against self-incrimination. He then testified that 49.1, Hakima Capital Pty Limited and Investa Connect Holdings Pty Limited were front companies which were his vehicles for receiving payments from Vele and Vele Petroport amounting to in excess of 7.6 million rand. And in return for those payments, Matodzi was buying silence from those that could speak the truth. That's Magula's words. Paragraph 50 reads, Magula's evidence in regard to the payments he received can best be summed up in the following exchange. And I quote, Mr. Hutton, let me put it as simply as this. Vele could not have acquired all the assets that it purported to acquire, and in each case used VBS money to do so. Had it not been for the fact that a number of people at VBS holding positions of authority had facilitated that in different ways. Somebody had to create the accounting conditions through which such payments could be made. Somebody had to authorize payments, somebody had to allow the flow of funds, and those were different people at different times in relation to different transactions. But there was a team of people who did the actual work in getting the money out of the bank and into the pockets of those who were selling assets to Vele. It doesn't appear to me that you were part of that operational methodology of Vele acquiring its assets. What you did was you were silent because you knew that what was going on was untoward. Your experience as a lender told you that none of this was legitimate. Mr. Magula says, I can say that, I can agree. Mr. Hutton, you can say that honestly? Mr. Magula, yes. Chair, I now go to paragraph 52.8. It had come to the attention of the board that very large loans had been made to clients of VBS without the requisite approvals being in place. He specifically mentioned the contract finance facility granted to Lera Tadima, which was initially 100 million rand and later increased to 250 million as a non-performing loan. However, no steps were ever taken to remedy the position. He ascribed this to the fact that numerous members of the board, including himself and Magula, were compromised. I now go to paragraph 55. Ramakosi was referring to Zanawara Bank's statements and to the fact that the total of 750,000 received by it from March to October 2017 from Venmont Holdings are the sole source of money coming into Zanawara. It was put to Ramakosi that inter alia, Nesane and Magula received benefits through the use of front companies for keeping silent about many irregularities that the setup of Zanawara appeared to be the same modus operandi. The interview was adjourned at that stage at Mr. Ramakosi's request in order to provide him with time to reflect. Second last paragraph 185.9. People like Magula, Nesani, Ramakosi, Makavu, and the Venda King were seduced by the vast amounts of money that was strewn about by VBS and Vele. They were paid handsomely for their influence and their silence. Ramavunga, Mokurapane, Matosa, and Truta were richly rewarded for their active participation in the unlawfulness that engulfed VBS and Vele. This is the view of Advocate Mutau. In my view, Malaba was no different. He received vast sums and he was required to do so as his paymaster required of him. I have come to the conclusion that he willingly played his part in the fraudulent scheme audit opinion of the 2017 financial statements of VBS, well knowing that the amounts reported in the financial statements in respect of cash and cash equivalents were grossly inflated and misstated. Chair, let's now turn to the amounts of money in total, which are
starts with 235.
The extent of the looting, paragraph 235. It was not possible in the course of the interviews to obtain a clear picture of the precise amount of money that had been looted from VBS by its captors. Indeed, that is something that the curator would need to ascertain accurately when he reads the full restatement of VBS's financial position. Nor was I able to ascertain with precision the amounts that every participant in the looting received. To a great extent, I have been limited by what the various interviewees confessed to. The forensic accountants have, however, set out in their report a detailed analysis of cash flows which gives a far clearer and more accurate picture of the extent of looting of VBS. Paragraph 237. It emerges from the forensic accountant's report that the amount of 1.894 billion rand was gratuitously received from VBS by some 53 persons of interest, both natural and juristic, over the period 1 March 2015 to 17 June 2018. I specifically refer to Table 8 in Appendix A. Amongst the biggest recipients, directly and indirectly, of these gratuitous payments are, and Chair, I won't go through the entire list, but paragraph 238.7, sorry, no, that's Paul Makavu, at 30.4 million. Paragraph 238.16, Ernest Nasane, 16.6 million. I don't see Paul Magula's name on this list. 19, I missed it. Paul Magula, 238.19, 14.8 million. Those were the total amounts received by those individuals, Chair.
And if you could perhaps just advise us who Vele and his associates were, because that was just under $1 billion.
Vele Investments were the holding company of VBS and the main shareholder of VBS. Vele Petroport was a subsidiary of Vele Investments.
Who was Vele?
The CEO of Vele, Vele was essentially Chifilwe Matodzi in the main, but it was a company.
Was the CEO?
Yes.
He was the CEO of VBS who had that company?
No, the chairperson of VBS was Chifilwe Matodzi. Vele was his company.
In essence, as chairman of VBS, he had a company, Vele, which basically got just under R1 billion.
That is the evidence of Mr. Naidu, Mr. Commissioner.
A question, do you know the assets that Vele had by any chance?
No, Chair, I do not know the total value of the assets because Vele Investments also owned 2 or 3 insurance companies. They owned an interest in an insurance benefit collection agency. They owned several properties. Vele is under liquidation, but I'm not aware of the total amount of assets in Vele.
Thank you.
Where does the issue here obviously is distinct in relation to what your role is as the regulator and the prosecutorial side, but do you have any awareness of where the prosecutorial recommendations and that investigation is that you could share with us, or not if you don't think it's appropriate?
Chair, what I can say is that we have submitted a formal criminal complaint based on the evidence that we have and contained in the Mutar report to the police and the Hawks, and this is being investigated by the police, the Hawks, and the NPA. I cannot say any more than that, Chair.
Can I also ask you, because obviously a number of the people involved in this belong to professional bodies, legal, accounting, etc. Have you as a regulator raised with those professional bodies the question of a disciplinary or some form of investigation into them in terms of their professional conduct? Because if you want to look at consequence, it also should be to the professional ethics, fit and proper side of things. Is that something that you have looked at?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We are cooperating with both IRBA, the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors, and SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. Both organizations have requested information from us to assist in their investigation of individuals mentioned in the Mutau report.
And legal, I mean, Mr. Nesani is a lawyer or an advocate. I'm not sure what his actual qualification is, but from the legal side and the legal profession, is there any role there, and should there be?
No, Chair, we have not been asked for any information from any of the legal bodies.
Would you be in a position to, I mean, would you want that to be looked at?
Yes, I think that that'll be good.
A different question, if I may, and again, this is a consequence or an outcome of what has occurred here. Given the changes made to the regulatory environment with the new structure, new responsibilities, market conduct and supervision, is there a role or should there be a role for formal board training on content? Not just, and that probably, in my view, should also consider ethics, values, fit and proper, but the technical side, what does the law allow? Which laws apply to you? You as a board member of a regulated entity is different from a normal Companies Act board. Banks, insurance companies have particular roles and responsibilities. Have you considered whether, in fact, there is a requirement for formal board training, certification for board members, qualification of some kind that you have had this or been through this process of training, whoever provides that training, who should provide that training? Have you considered a formal training program for board members as part of your approval? Because if I understand correctly, you approve board members sitting on boards. Is that something, not just, oh, I have this degree, but do I actually know the content and requirements to sit and be fit and proper and execute my duties as a board member of a bank or a financial entity that is regulated?
Thank you, Chair. Let me make 3 points in response to that. The first is that the Mutual Banks Act, I think, should be updated to give the regulator the same kind of intrusive powers as the Banks Act in terms of the appointment of certain board members and executives. The Mutual Banks Act is far less intrusive than the Banks Act in this regard. Chair, the second point is, yes, I think training and some sort of board certification in general would be a good idea. Chair, the third point I want to make is, I do not think in these particular cases that the problem was a lack of competence.
But perhaps a question of ethics and values and fit and proper.
Yes.
Which is a different subject matter, because it doesn't matter the amount of training, you would not deal with that through training. But what it might do is have other members of the board more vigilant and more aware of what their duties are. So you may get rotten apples, but it does mean that there may be non-rotten apples who have a better appreciation of their own responsibility individually as well as collectively.
I fully agree.
I hope that'll happen in the future so that we get something going along that line. Just in relation to the updating of the Mutual Banks Act, surely that is something that was in your own purview to do. It does not require somebody else.
Technically, it's the Minister of Finance that tables legislation in Parliament.
That's the tabling, that's not the drafting.
So we're working with the Treasury to develop amendments to the Mutual Banks Act.
Just about Mr. Nesani, did you consider reporting to the organization under whose jurisdiction he falls?
Chair, that's not something that we thought of, but since it's been mentioned here, I think we should refer that to the relevant professional body. Thank you for that suggestion.
I think if I recall, it probably would be the Law Society of the Northern Provinces. Okay.
A different question, which is a bit different, but I hope you can answer that. Yesterday, we had someone from the PIC who said that, the collapse of the bank, there wasn't much they could do because they kind of relied on the auditors, like PwC and the bank, SARP. So I just want to know that, is there something that SARP could have done better to avoid the collapse of the bank, given that the PIC has lost money and they said they were looking at you to regulate the bank?
Thank you for that question, Chair. My answer would be both yes and no. So in one sense, yes, we too were duped by auditor reports that said everything was fine. In fact, several occasions in the last 3 or 4 years where we thought or suspected something was wrong, the auditor said nothing was wrong, everything was fine. And for small banks, we do rely heavily on audited financial statements. In hindsight, we probably should rely slightly less on audited financial statements and have secondary checks or additional checks as we do with bigger banks. So in that one sense, yes, I think you can argue that the public was deceived, the regulator was deceived. But Chair, in another sense, the PIC were the second largest shareholder and had at least 2 people sitting on the board. And it is clear from the evidence presented to the Mutau Commission that those 2 individuals knew that there was a problem and were silent. And I think that that's the crux of my testimony today here, is that as shareholder representatives, in one sense, they had a fiduciary responsibility towards the company on which they were serving as a board, but they also had at least a legal and moral obligation to the shareholder to ensure that the company is run properly and in a sound and fiduciary, with high fiduciary standards.
Thank you.
Is that it from?
That is the evidence. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Naidu, for your time, and thanks very much for your statement or affidavit that you deposed to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Commissioner, it seems I was a bit conservative in my estimate. I've arranged for the next witness to start at 11 o'clock. Can I ask that we adjourn till then? If they're earlier here, I'll approach you, then we can start earlier, but that was the arrangement.
Yes, we'll adjourn until 11.
Sawubona.
Mr. Commissioner, my apology for starting later than anticipated. It is not because of Dr. Survey and his legal team. They were on time, but unfortunately at the Arms Corps building, and it's not the first time this has happened. Perhaps it's an opportune moment to advise everybody that the sittings are in this building and not at Arms Corps, but they are ready now.
Yeah, I
And-
think we can just remind or ask our media department, just to remind people that the sittings are at the same Marks building rather than, because that's our head office, as it were, Arms Corps, but the sittings are here. So our media people must please attend to that.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, my colleague Kasim SC is representing Dr. Survey. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Mr. Commissioner, learned members of the Commission, I appear together with my learned friends, Ms. Pillay and Mr. Solek, for Dr. Survey. Our instructing attorney is present, Mr. Charles Abrams. With your leave, may I then be permitted to lead his evidence?
Aziz, just speak in the mic, sir. Yeah, that's it.
Yes. Yes, I'll do that. Thank you.
Now you sit. You can sit while you lead there.
Yes, thank you.
My colleague Kasim will lead the witness, Mr. Commissioner. You can sit while you
Thank you. Dr. Survey, would you just...
Lizzie,
Yeah.
just have it like
Yes.
this.
Dr. Survey, will you give your full names to the Commission, please?
Dr. Mohammed Iqbal Survey.
You must just take the oath.
Sorry, Mr. Kasim, one of my colleagues says they didn't hear you. Can you just repeat
Yes, certainly.
your introduction?
Yes, certainly. My surname is
with?
My surname is Kasim. I'm an advocate at the Johannesburg Bar. I represent Dr. Survey together with my colleagues, Ms. Pillay and Mr. Solek, who sit on my left, and my instructing attorney, Mr. Charles Abrams.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
You must just take the
Dr. Survey, just repeat your full names, and then the oath can be administered to you.
Dr. Mohammed Iqbal Survey.
Can I administer?
Mohammed or Mahomet? Is it M-O or M-A?
MO.
M-O.
Just stand to take the
Can you please stand on? Dr. Survey, I take it you have no objections in taking the oath?
None whatsoever.
Yes. Do you swear that the evidence you give will
Right,
be the
that's
truth,
fine.
nothing but the
Didn't do
truth? So oh, sorry, will the judge administer? My colleague says, take the oath, so I said fine.
Do I take it twice?
It's fine. You can do it left and right.
No, that's fine, Mr. Kasim, I understand. Dr. Survey, do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
None whatsoever.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Do you raise your right hand, so help me God?
God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May be seated. Yes, Mr. Kasim.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, we have prepared a written statement. Can I take it that you and your learned members have had an opportunity of working through the document? In which,
I don't know about the term working through the document, but we have perused it.
in which case I'm going to then simply pick up the themes in the document itself. Dr. Survey,
Let me get my colleagues working on.
When you say pick up the themes, I was under the impression that you would read the entirety into the text.
if you prefer
Are
that.
you not wanting to do that?
No, we can do that.
That's preferable so that we have it on record.
That's fine. I thought I'll make him talk through the document, but if you prefer that, then he can read it.
And
yes.
you can interject here and there if you
Thank
need,
you.
if you want.
Thank you. Before you do that, Doctor, do you also affirm the correctness of this document itself?
Correct.
Yes. Yes. Then will you proceed to read the document?
So, first of all, Mr. Commissioner, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate the fact that I'm given the opportunity to set the record straight on a number of issues and hopefully provide context and clarify issues. If I may start then on the introduction. During the week commencing the 21st of March, 2019, Advocate Libbe, SC, the evidence leader of the Commission, called upon me to deal with 8 interrelated issues in respect of 3 legal entities. I was advised that this may be of assistance to the Commission in its deliberations. As a committed South African, I appreciate the opportunity to make my input. I point out that other than Independent Media Pty Limited, of which I am the chairperson of the board, I do not hold any office on the executive or otherwise in IO Technology Solutions Limited and Sagamata Technologies Limited. The issues that I've been requested to deal with relate to IO, Independent Media and Sagamata in respect of the following: the origination of every deal, the meetings with the Public Investment Corporation with reference to date, place and PIC officials involved, the status of the independent media investment, the relevance and importance of BT in the IO transaction, whether the total amount invested by the PIC in IO is still available, if not, details of payments made with reference to whom, account number, amount and reason for payment, whether the PIC paid transaction fees with regard to independent media and IO, and if so, the amounts paid, the identity of the beneficiary and how the amount was calculated, the appointment of a new board for IO. I will endeavour to deal with each of these matters that is of interest to the Commission. In so doing, I make myself available to be interrogated by members of the Commission, as well as the evidence leader, and undertake to respond fully to the best of my ability. I am by training a medical doctor, and in October 1997, earmarked as a career as an entrepreneur. For completeness' sake, my biography is set out in the document, which I attach hereto as marked A. Okay. Do you want me to read the
No, I think
okay.
carry on.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Right. I serve as executive chairman of the Second Jala Group, or the group with its headquarters in Cape Town. The group has more than 200 investments across the African continent, with an intrinsic market value exceeding several $billion. Second Jala is the shareholder equity partner to a number of multinationals on the African continent, including Siemens AG, Nokia Solutions and Networks, Saab AB, British Telecom, Corient, and amongst others. And I serve as either chairman or deputy chairman of many of these companies' boards. Second Jala's investment portfolio includes oil and gas, food, fishing, aquaculture, power resources, transport and mobility, telecom, civil security and defense, media, technology, biotechnology, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, and asset management. Second Jala pioneers many social impact investment initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa. The groups and its investment partners together employ tens of thousands of people on the African continent. A fuller description of the group's business activities appears on the website www.secondjala.com. Prior to dealing pertinently with the issues raised by Advocate Libbe in his email of 26th of March 2019, I wish to deal with 2 distinct topics. The first relates to PIC's role and place in the broader South African economic environment. Secondly, I will deal with the investment philosophy of the Second Jala Group. The background and context. The broader picture is this. A year ago, the market capitalization of some 200 companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange was 12 trillion rand. PIC's investment in these companies was in the region of 1.6 trillion. I venture to suggest that companies started by black entrepreneurs like myself, that are black-owned and black-managed with black beneficiaries, do not have more than a few hundred billion of the total market capitalization of 12 trillion of the JSE. Thus it is well recognized that 25 years into our democracy, the capital markets in South Africa have not been transformed. Black ownership and control on the JSE remains negligible. Real economic wealth still vests in white-controlled and dominated companies. The result is that racial inequalities exhibited elsewhere in the South African economy, such as ownership and control of land, continue to be reproduced on the JSE. Investing in business carries risks. While the PIC's investments in Naspers, British American Tobacco, InBev, and BHP have proven successful, PIC has suffered enormous losses in the tens of billions of rands as a result of underperformance in companies such as Steinhoff, MTN, Aspen, EOH, Group 5, and TISO Blackstar, and many more. That's the bit I've just added in. Okay. Thus, PIC's reluctance to promote and invest in black companies on the JSE, which makes up much less than 10% of the portfolio, requires re-evaluation. I submit this demonstrates that not enough is being done by the PIC in transforming the South African economy for the greater good of the majority of its people. PIC has recently lost its investment in Steinhoff to the tune of 24 billion. And this stands out because Steinhoff was always regarded as a top-performing company, controlled by whites, and in the main considered a leading South African brand. The values of the second Jala Group.
This, I take it, is the second point you want to deal before dealing with the pertinent issues in this matter.
That is correct, yes. The second Jala Group is a private holding company and was founded in 1997 by a group of former political activists who fought in the anti-apartheid struggle. The first chairman of the second Jala Development Foundation, the controlling shareholder of the group, was, whilst he was the Director General in President Mandela's office, Professor Jakes Kerwell, was also the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Western Cape. I left my career as a medical doctor to lead Second Jala in this very exciting period for black economic empowerment and listed on the JSE as Second Jala Investments Limited, today called African Equity Empowerment Investments, not to be confused with Second Jala Group and Second Jala Holdings. At the time, with the support of corporate finance houses and bank institutions, I was one of the youngest CEOs of a diversified investment company on the JSE in May 1999, if not the youngest. Okay. Second Jala can be described as belonging to the second wave of black economic empowerment. This wave included prominent black companies such as NAIL, New Africa Investments Limited, RAIL, Real Africa Investments Limited, NEC, Vela Panda, and many others. It was the time when Madiba himself spoke about the need to transform the economy and the active role that needed to be played by entrepreneurs and professionals in the transformation of the economy. It was at this time that black businesses, especially those that had been rooted in the struggle, started investing in the support of institutions in companies that were listed on the JSE. The model was straightforward. Black businesses lacked experience at the corporate level, although there were many successful individual black businesses, but not at the scale of corporate South Africa. Banks and insurance companies provided capital, working with listed companies to create the mirage of black transformation of the economy. The effect was that on paper, these institutions and their advisors, who benefited handsomely from these transactions, funded selected black entrepreneurs, including eminent individuals and friends of mine, such as the late Tato Harrison Motlana, Eric Malobi, Don Nube, Tokyo Sequali, and many others. At one point, the market capitalization of companies such as NAIL reached a high of almost 10 billion, making it one of the most successful black companies on the JSE. The truth, however, is that the effective black ownership and control of these entities was negligible. The tragic outcome of that today, Mr. Commissioner, is that NAIL, Real, and Velopanda do not exist, and there has been a market reduction in black companies on the JSE. This, in my view, is a disgrace 25 years into our young democracy. Further, in real terms, the combined economic ownership of black people in AEI, which was then Second Jala Investments, in May 1999, was less than 10% compared to the remaining shareholding, which was held by institutions such as Sanlam, Standard Bank, Southern Life, and Old Mutual. So black ownership was effectively less than 10%. Upon reflection, I suggest that the model of black economic empowerment was not designed to bring about meaningful economic transformation, but served as a mere entry point into the capital markets, albeit in an artificial way. Over the next decade, I watched as prominent companies were destroyed as a result of the share prices failing to perform. I refer here to black companies. The debt structures being unsustainable to the point that today, black participation in the economy remains negligible. The model of economic participation was fundamentally flawed, and that led to an introspection of our own model at Sekunjalo. In our first decade, like all the other black companies, we shared the same negative experiences. A small economic interest owned by black people, high debt structures, inability to scale, dependence on development finance institutions, dependent on government businesses or quotas, lack of owned equity and capital, monopolistic market conditions that remain today, import substitution and dumping with the withdrawal of tariffs, highly geared structures that remain today for most black institutions, poorly underlined share performances. May I just take a short bit of a break? Thank you. Sekunjalo resolved to aspire and to be guided by the following policy principles. Build an industrial company that would have ownership of the business through direct economic control implicitly by black people.
Dr. Surveyor, can I just stop you there? Mr. Commissioner, is it necessary for him to read out the remaining of that particular paragraph? It's peculiar to this particular business. It's documented.
It's not necessary.
It's not, yes. Can I then ask you to move ahead and talk about what you've described as the new dawn of technology?
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, the South African economy is monopolistic, and because of that monopolism, it's important for black entrants in the economy to look at where they can compete. One of these areas is technology, because it's an area where the monopolies that are in mining, in retail, in property, and in other sectors of the economy cannot prevent new entrants very easily. So the new dawn of technology. A specific focus of Sekunjalo was in technology. And as an example, Genius Biotherapeutics became the leading African biotechnology company in personalized medicine, cancer therapeutics, utilizing the body's own immune system, dendritic cells. And Genius is owned by us, of course, and it is registered in with more than 30 global patents in the areas of immune therapy and personalized medicine. It also developed South Africa's first biogenetic plants with state-of-the-art investment. In that area, the idea is that South Africa would become self-sufficient in the area of personalized medicine, which would reduce the cost to the public, in particular in the areas of prostate cancer, breast cancer, and other areas of diseases, because the poor in our country cannot afford the expensive drugs that multinationals provide to them. We partnered with universities of Cape Town, Pretoria, and Cardiff to research in the fields of tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, and cancer therapeutics, utilizing advanced biotechnology. It was and remains pleasing to me that the leading scientists and researchers were predominantly black employees, PhDs, masters, honors science from South Africa and from the African continent. Genius is expected to be listed on an international stock exchange so they could pursue the further raising of capital, enhancing its business activities, especially in the area of clinical trials. Sekunjalo has invested hundreds of millions in Genius to fund clinical research and to promote its business. Some 10 years after it registered its patents, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to doctors that utilized immature cells, or the body's own cells, for purpose of cancer therapeutics, and thereby validating our position as a leading biotechnology globally in this particular area.
Dr. Surveyor, I want to stop you at that stage. Paragraphs 19 to 21 then are further examples of the strides made by Sekunjalo in this particular line of business activities. I want you then to turn to paragraph 22.
Thank you. The Sekunjalo Group is internationally recognized as a technology investor. It brought about opportunity to enhance, promote, and fulfill the aspiration of technological skills in South Africa and Africa, and spread its application in the African continent. It has received acknowledgement, Mr. Commissioner, by the World Economic Forum as one of the world's new champions. This is a highly prestigious grouping of companies in the world, and this gave the impetus for expanding the group into 9 different sectors. Sekunjalo, as I say at the bottom, was one of only 5 African companies chosen out of a global elite of 125 to be named the new champion company. The other South African company was Sasol, just for example.
I want to stop you there, and before we round off this topic, how many people are employed in the Sekunjalo group, approximately?
Well, if we take directly with our investments and associates, I would say at least more than 25,000 people.
Yes, and in the technology sector?
It's very difficult to say, but different companies, I would say, if you take again with associates and investees, I would say at least about 10,000 of that.
Yes.
But I cannot give you an accurate number on that.
I then want to take you to paragraph 23 of your written statement.
23.
Yes.
I now proceed to deal pertinently with the issues raised by Advocate Libber. In so doing, I'm mindful that the information sought from me is limited to 3 legal entities, namely independent media, IO and Sagamata. I propose to deal with the issues raised holistically by reference to the legal entity and its relevance in this inquiry.
Yes, please proceed. You deal firstly with Sagamata.
PIC has made no financial investment in Sagamata. In any event, to allay fears, I deal more fully with this entity, its current status, and why I consider it was a missed opportunity for the PIC not to have invested in this company.
Dr. Survey, so can the Learned Commissioner and his members accept that there is no financial exposure by PIC in Sagamata at all?
Absolutely none.
Yes.
In fact, we have spent 80 million in preparing Sagamata for the listing on, firstly, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and secondly, on an international stock exchange. I visited with my colleagues the New York Stock Exchange in May 2017, I think, or 2017. I visited the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in May 2017. Both exchanges, in fact, made it very clear to us that they would welcome the listing of Sagamata on those stock exchanges. And if I may just say one other thing, the only reason why we wanted to list on the JSE, because is at that time, the South African government primarily did not allow primary listing of such companies on foreign exchanges. That policy has just recently been changed. Of course, secondly, it gave South Africans an opportunity to participate in a multi-sided platform company. For the first time, a unicorn would emerge from the African continent that would be able to compete and have data that is owned by Africans for Africans and platforms for Africans in an advanced economic platform business strategy.
I think just to give context to what you've said, can you read out paragraphs 26 and 27, please?
Sagamata is a company that
Sorry,
renders...
before you do, I just would like you to repeat what you said before the witness said. What did you say we should accept? Mr. Kasim, can you repeat
you
said?
Yes. Can the, I asked you whether this particular commission can accept that there is no financial exposure by the PIC in the legal entity Sagamata.
I would say that I think it's a subject for discussion because it is particular, the exposure is a consequence of certain things, or the lack of exposure is a consequence of certain things. So it cannot just be taken at face value, that point you're making.
But before you reach, with great respect, before you reach that level of debate, there must be an outlay of money.
No. You're saying we must, you've put it on the table.
Yes.
That we must accept at the outset that there's no exposure. And I'm saying at this point in time, I would like that to be a subject for discussion. I'm not sure why you've put it out at the beginning. Let it be part of the discussion that we're having and let the testimony proceed.
Happy to do that. But as we sit here, PIC is not a creditor of
I'm not
Sagamata.
prepared to debate that with you. I'm asking that the submission be continued without a precondition of what we as a commission should be agreeing to.
No difficulty with that.
Thank you. Please proceed.
But as a forensic fact, I put on record.
I'm asking you to please proceed without trying to put words or decisions in our mouths before we have an opportunity to discuss the matter.
I suggest then let's read at paragraph 26.
Thank you. So Sagamata is a company that renders a multi-sided platform defined above as an MSP, which comprises technologies, services, or products that add value primarily by enabling direct interactions between two or more participating parties or transacting parties. Prominent examples of this include Uber, Airbnb, eBay, Amazon. Essentially, they serve two or more customer bases and facilitate transactions between the participating parties. One of the primary benefits to MSP companies is their scalability. Mr. Commissioner, would be very happy to explain to you the valuation modeling for MSPs, because looking at what has happened in this commission, there's been either naivety or complete disinformation on how these companies are valued. And I'm quite happy to explain this in great detail. For example, just this last week, Lyft, which is a mobile company such as Uber, has listed on the New York Stock Exchange with a market capitalization of 23 billion, which is the same as Fiat and Chrysler, which has been in existence for a long time, bigger than Avis and Hertz. But what is more interesting is that Lyft's losses for the last 2 years were in the region of about $800 million and $1 billion. I can take you through the modeling of MSPs, because if you don't understand the modeling of MSPs for Sagamata, it's very difficult to understand Sagamata itself, and I'm very happy to do that.
But that might become relevant at a later stage. Okay, unite paragraph 27.
Sagamata has a proven track record of customizing and developing technology platforms in media, e-commerce, classifieds, and syndication content in its current business verticals. It has operated these with capital efficiency and has previously elected to limit its own growth until recent times, when it applied to list on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange by way of a private placement in April 2018.
And Dr. Survey, that did not take place.
That did not take place, exactly.
Yes. Paragraph 28.
Sagamata believes that South Africa needs its own leading MSP company to compete with multinational companies. If this does not happen, multinationals will extract all value from Africa for the benefit of Europe and the USA. South Africa is well poised to develop the continent and upskill its people. This will just be, if I may say so, another form of colonialism. It is just neo-colonialism, except in the technology space.
Paragraph 29.
The purpose of the private placing was to execute the vision of Sagamata, to provide African subscribers, consumers and businesses with the prime experience of digital media, e-commerce, social media and business marketplace.
Yes, please proceed.
Previously, Sagamata had raised capital locally through the private equity markets and has utilized its limited capital to establish its technology base, which Sagamata has in Silicon Cape, which is an African haven for software developers. Sagamata has access to software providers and developers, advanced applications because of the parent company, Sekunjalo Group's investment in local ICT companies, as well as in several multinationals operating in Africa. These multinationals are in the areas of industrial, engineering, telecommunications, ICT companies, and defense and radar systems. Examples include Siemens, AG, Nokia, Alcatel, British Telecoms, and Saab. And I want to say, these are not just partners, Mr. Commissioner, of Sekunjalo. We are actual shareholders of these companies. So these are not joint venture companies. We are shareholders of these companies. And we have been shareholders for the last 2 decades. And our relationships with these multinationals go on for a long, long, long time, with a lot of credibility.
I think you can now turn to paragraph 31.
The vision of Sagamata is to provide 100 million African subscribers, consumers and businesses with a prime experience of digital media, e-commerce, social media and business marketplace. This is no different to Amazon Prime, which only has, the last number which I saw, 120 million subscribers at the same demographic per capita as this, and with a market capitalization of $1 trillion today, one of the world's top 2 largest companies. The mission is to execute this through Sagamata's 10-point plan, achieved over a period of 5 to 7 years, with 1 billion users on the social media platform in 10 years. Sagamata will provide the African middle-class consumer and business person with an affordable, accessible, high-quality, integrated, multi-sided platform experience in content, e-commerce, social media, and video, which is called Sagamata PIC. Sagamata PIC seeks to become the branded e-commerce media MSP company like the likes of Amazon and Alibaba in the USA and China. In order to achieve its vision, significant capital is required at a low cost of capital. Sagamata's initial strategy was to raise between 3 billion and 7.5 billion through the JSE listing as a precursor to a much more substantial capital raise on a foreign exchange. The amount raised in South Africa would be one of many funding rounds required to execute Sagamata's vision. I must add at this point that the capital raised in South Africa on international stock exchange, as we have said to the Reserve Bank of South Africa, would be brought back into South Africa and Africa to upskill at least 5,000 ICT engineers, data scientists in 3 regional centers in Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa, so that Africans take control of their own multi-sided platform. Because all of us are on Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, but these platforms are not owned by our own people. They are owned by others outside the African continent. And so the economies of those platforms, which make up the world's top 5 largest companies today, are not accessible to the African people. And this is an attempt to allow Africans to take ownership of not only the economic factors, but also the data, which is critical in order to monetize this over a period of time. We had hoped that the PIC would commit to investing 3 billion with other investors, including foreign investors committing to investing 4.5 billion.
Dr. Survey, did any foreign investor commit to invest in this project?
Yes, indeed, they did. We had commitments from a number of foreign investors, and I just want to outline at this point the advisory board and the key people involved in Sagamata, if I may.
Yes, I think proceed to that.
So, Mr. Commissioner, Sagamata's International Advisory Board is second to none. There is no other South African company, not even Naspers, that has a board of this caliber. In the first instance, the chairman of the Sagamata Advisory Board is Ambassador Harold Doley. He is the first black man to own a seat and the only black man to date on the New York Stock Exchange, Doley Securities. He's a beacon amongst the African American community in the USA. He's one of the top guys. And so a gentleman like this does not take on, he was the ambassador to the African Development Bank as well. He does not take on the chairmanship of such an institution unless he really thought it is something important. He has a network within the capital markets of the USA and globally. The second person I want to highlight, and he does not serve on many boards, but what he says, and you can Google this, determines what happens in the global capital markets, and that is Jim Rogers. Jim Rogers is the founder of the Quantum Fund with George Soros. So Jim is one of the top, most successful businessmen in the world today. Now, for him to serve on our advisory board and take up an investment in Sagamata tells you how seriously, he is. And what Jim says goes in many parts of the world, including in the USA and in Hong Kong. Other people that serve on this advisory board is Marcel Boekhorn, who is the top technology entrepreneur in Holland and an investment partner of mine in other areas. Then there are also, just to...
Dr. Survey, I'm going to stop you there. If this becomes of any further interest, it will be pursued with you. Can I then ask you just to confirm that the Johannesburg Stock Exchange listing of Sagamata did not proceed?
The listing did not proceed because SABC had raised an issue with one of the subsidiary companies, and I can only say that that is disgraceful and in bad faith. And I can elaborate on that if you wish. But there was no basis for them to do it. They did that because you had our competitors, TISO, Black Star Publications, Business Day, as they continue to do, ENCA and others, as they continue to do, blatantly put negative propaganda in the public space forced the JSE to look for a reason to scupper this listing. And when this was brought up by SABC, as they did once again in this instance with IO, where they had no basis to do it, where their facts were patently wrong, if you look at what they said in the submission to court papers, Mr. Commissioner, it's disgraceful that a state-regulated institution can be used in this way for either political or commercial objectives to undermine a legitimate business. That is not the rule of law. That is not what I, as a committed South African and African, expect in this country. That it's an abuse of a regulator. When it's an abuse, and I'm glad our courts threw it out. And this was the second attempt by SABC. In the first instance, they had never before ever raised an issue about one of the subsidiaries of Sagamata, according to which they say had not filed. It's not true because those financials were in the PLS. And we objected. By the time we objected to this, the JSE had withdrew the listing. The JSE did not withdraw the listing because of capital raising. That is an absolute lie. They did not withdraw this listing because the PIC did not invest. That is an absolute lie. The JSE withdrew this listing because Business Day, TSO Blackstar publications that are competing with independent media and have tried to buy independent media surreptitiously and sabotage the company, saw that independent media would be part of the larger ecosystem of Sagamata, went to SABC and got someone to make a statement to this effect. That is in bad faith. And when, really I must say this, as a committed South African and as an African, when state institutions do this to a business that employs thousands of people, committed to black economic empowerment and the progress of our economy, and we've never been corrupt, and that's one thing I pride myself on, the integrity of our processes within our group. And when that happens...
Dr. Survey, at this stage, what I want to do is just establish 3 more facts and then move on to independent media.
Yes, sorry, I got carried away. When I see the bad faith of what SABC did, it really angers me as a committed South African, committed to development of my country and this continent.
I don't know how relevant that is to the work that the Commission is doing. We don't have any evidence before us in that regard, and I'm not sure that it has
Commissioner,
any relevance
we'll move on. Thank you. 3 more facts as far as Sagamata is concerned. It is listing presently on the New York Stock Exchange.
No, the facts are that we have applied to the Reserve Bank of South Africa Exchange Control for permission for a primary listing in New York and other exchanges. We were told by the South African Reserve Bank there should be no problem when we applied in December last year. Subsequent to that, we were informally told because of IO and because it's a common shareholder, they have to go to Treasury for approval for us to list in New York. And again, I have to say, I find that odd. I find that unbelievable.
That's fine. We can raise that elsewhere. The second aspect I want to deal with Sagamata because it's pertinent to the questions put to you by the respected Commission leader is that who did the negotiations with the PIC and Sagamata?
Well, once again, for the record, I am not a board member of Sagamata. We had recruited a top international executive, Paul Lamontagne, who had spent 15 years in Africa in development institutions as part of impact investing on the continent, who's today been appointed as the head of the FinDev Canada by Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada. That's the caliber of the kind of leadership Sagamata had.
But the other gentleman there was Mr. Hover.
Mr. Takova Hove, and currently the joint CEOs that are the head of Loot and the Gary Hatfield, and the head of the African News Agency, Grant Fredericks.
But Mr. Hover is available to testify
if
need be on the negotiations.
Yes,
And then just finally, and then I'm done with Sagamata for present purposes, Sagamata was approached for an investment of 3 billion. As I understand the position, no monies were invested.
Absolutely not a cent was invested by the PIC in Sagamata. And again, I repeat.
Yes, that's all I want to establish.
Yeah,
and the holding company of Sagamata spent about 80 million rand for the listing.
Absolutely. In order to get, if you look at, what is amazing, people talk about valuations, it's a disgrace because the two valuations that the JSE insisted on are international valuations done by Redwood Capital Partners, which is a San Francisco-based entity that has valued more than 500 companies, including Facebook, WhatsApp, and a whole host of others, and Snap. And we had to go to great lengths in order to satisfy the JSE through an 8-month rigorous process through this international valuation. Secondly, the audit committee of Sagamata got the University of Columbia, head of finance faculties, to provide a detailed valuation for the purposes of the board of Sagamata. We did not do this necessarily for the JSE, although that eventually became a requirement. We did this because we were going to list in New York. Sagamata needed that international valuation, and their valuation, which no one mentions, by the way, is a valuation of between $3.5 billion and $4 billion, taking into account the African markets. I have no doubt that if you look at Uber, which to date has lost $11 billion, is valued at $120 billion, I have no doubt that Sagamata would have reached a $10 billion market capitalization on the New York Stock Exchange. So it's disgraceful when you use someone that has no concept of how to value MSPs and present that as an expert in this. I'm happy to debate on any platform with such an individual, with any finance professor in this country,
we've got to make
any
progress.
time.
I now want you to turn to independent media. That's the second entity you were called upon to deal with. Can you turn to paragraph 37, please, and read this out?
Okay. Independent media. In 2012, I considered it necessary for a different narrative to reflect balance of South Africa as a country and as a developing nation. And I want to say at this point, Africans and South Africans are represented by predominantly the white media that had not changed until then. It is owned by the same people who owned it during apartheid, as barbarians, as corrupt. They do not give account to intellectuals and others. In any event, I traveled to Ireland in an endeavor to persuade the Irish Independent Group to dispose of independent news and media, PLC interest in South Africa, to a South African-based company. At that stage, there was real resistance from the Irish. About a year later, things changed dramatically. The Irish company was experiencing financial problems in Europe, largely because of the debt they had taken on in order to acquire other media companies in other parts of the world, and it appeared it was necessary to dispose of its South African interests, which was then a financially viable business. It demanded approximately $4.48 billion. At that time, Dennis O'Brien, who was the largest investor in Irish Independent, went public to say they will not accept anything less than 280 million euros at the time for the South African business, which was previously the Argus Group and renamed Independent News and Media South Africa. Had I known that I would be subjected to such defamation and criminality on the parts of people like ENCA and others, maybe I might not have done this. Maybe I might not have done this if these other media houses rooted in apartheid had launched this campaign against me. From the time, Mr. Commissioner, that I dared to enter a white domain, a white media industry, and transform it for the benefit of our country. 5 bidders were shortlisted by the advisors, Investec, who ran the process. The Sekunjalo Consortium, there were probably 20 or 30, I don't know, people that bidded for independent media. There were 5 only that were shortlisted. The Sekunjalo Consortium was, however, the ultimate successful entity in 2013. Its mission was to become Africa's premier provider of quality content across all media platforms. And I think one of the reasons why we were successful is that we went, as we do in all of our acquisitions, we appointed professional advisors. We appointed Citibank, their South African and London and global office with their media advisors. And I want to tell you, Mr. Commissioner, a story. The PIC sent 8 people of their private equity team to meet with us to discuss with Citibank and ourselves the merits of this transaction. At the end
Can I just stop you there? You ultimately purchased it for 2 billion rand, is that correct?
We did.
And in paragraph 42 is where PIC gets involved. It says, just read paragraph, 42, please.
In the end, the purchase consideration was funded by a Chinese investor, and I can explain that in a bit more detail, investing R1 billion, and a PIC investing 850 million. The narrative, the disgraceful narrative that people put out there.
Before you do that, from the documents I saw, and I think you must clarify, the ANC, in fact, the PIC, in fact, invested R1 billion.
But immediately we paid them 150 million.
You paid them?
Immediately,
So
at the time of the transaction. So their real investment with equity for their shareholding, as well as the debt, is 850 million. And the point I'm making is not 2 billion,
yes,
which is the narrative that is peddled out there. That is not true.
So you've now clarified the investment. They made an investment of R1 billion. They were paid 150 billion.
1 million.
150 million, my apologies. And the outstanding amount of the investment, the capital investment, was 850 million.
That's correct. The debt and equity. Yeah.
And then in 43, this is one of the pertinent issues you were asked to deal with. Can you just deal with that, 43?
Sure. The advisory fees were paid 10 million to Weber Wenzel attorneys, and amount of approximately 24 million to Citibank.
Yes, and then in 44, I think that's important.
Yeah, in the latter part of 2018, the second Jala Group put in a firm offer to the PIC, and I'm sure this will come as a surprise to the Commission. This meant that second Jala would take on the exposure of the PIC over and above its current support of the operating cash flow needs of the business. Again, I have to add that only Second Jalo, since inception, has funded independent media. The PIC has not funded it since the time of the acquisition, where the payment was made to the Irish. The Chinese have not funded it. Second Jalo Group, in order to keep 1,500 people employed, in order to make sure that this country has an alternative narrative that is not white-dominated, and with this particular narrative, we continue to fund independent media. And I think to date, my colleagues can check this with me, it's in the region of about 250 to 300 million. And we continue to fund all the time. It is Second Jala that funds independent media, Mr. Commissioner, for the benefit of the PIC, who is a shareholder of independent media.
Can I just stop you there? That you've dealt with in paragraph 47, and then in paragraph 48, I think you should just repeat the proposed offer. Can you just repeat that?
The offer that we made to the PIC towards the last quarter of 2018 was an offer which we intended to make also to the Chinese, to Intercom, and this would have resulted in a capital exposure to the second Jala Group of approximately 2.5 to 2.8 billion over the next 5 years. But I thought it was important to do this so that, the GPF could get its money back, its capital back. PIC would retain its equity. I thought it's important to keep people employed. I thought it's important to bring stability.
So just to summarize that then, you offered to take over their capital investment, but their interest, the shares in independent media would remain intact.
They would keep their shares. Both the Chinese and the PIC would keep their shares, and effectively we would take over the debt. That's correct.
Yes, so
and there was zero exposure to us right now other than the working capital that we're providing to independent media. But I, Mr. Commissioner, through the second Jalo Group's dividends of all of its investment, which I've outlined earlier, was prepared to take on that risk and prepared to allow GPF and its beneficiaries and, indirectly the taxpayer to actually benefit from that.
to round off this topic, was there any response from PIC to the offer?
Yes, well, my colleagues, Mr. Hover, will tell you that there was agreement on the terms, that both parties' legal entities had looked at it, and we had in fact sent a signed offer in to the PIC, and we were told by the PIC representative that, I think it was Mr. Mervyn Muller, that it was all approved by the investment committee. And then we were informed subsequently, just recently in fact, by one of the PIC representatives that, to quote, for political reasons, the PIC will not accept this offer. And we were told that they were going to use some excuse around the structuring.
Fine, you don't have to go further into that. Do you confirm that independent media employs some 1,500 people?
That is correct. It is a large-scale employer in the media space in South Africa today.
And can you just read paragraph 49 to finish this topic?
Mr. Commissioner, it is respectfully submitted that in the circumstances there is nothing untoward about this transaction.
We then turn to IO. Can you please tell the Commission what is your position in IO?
I do not have any position in IO. I am not a director or executive of IO.
Do you own any shares in IO?
My shareholding in IO, when I say my, it's very important to understand that there are various investment entities through which the Second Jala Group invests. So in the first instance, we are the majority shareholder of African Equity Empowerment Investments. We approximately own about 65% of that, more or less. And that owns about 50% of IO. So our effective shareholding in IO is 30%. And then directly we have a very, very tiny percentage of IO as Second Jala Group. So in truth, our effective shareholding is 30% of IO.
Yes. Now, although
so when you say we, you mean Sekunjalo Group?
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Yes. I've asked you to ask people who can deal with detailed information, in particular the financial aspects of IO, to be available today. Do you confirm that they are available?
They are available.
Can you
indeed.
identify them? Who's available?
I think the Chief Investment Officer of IO is sitting somewhere here. Mr. Malik Sali is there, and he would be available to provide that information.
Yes, if it needs arises. So can you now go to paragraph 50?
Yes. So IO was previously known as Second Jala Technology Solutions Limited and has been in business for approximately 20 years. In 2016, I stress 20 years. There are some people that think IO came about last week. Okay. It's been around for 20 years. In 2016, it changed its name to IO Technology Solutions in anticipation of a public listing of its shareholding on the JSE. It took me a while to find out what IO means, I must admit, from the colleagues. IO is an investment associate of African Equity Empowerment Investment, which in turn is a subsidiary of Second Jala Investment Holdings, which is part of the Second Jala Group. IO is an information...
Can I just stop you there? I also asked you to have a representative of AEEI available, if need be, to answer issues relating to the flow of funds, because it is the holding company.
Of IO,
yes.
Associate, it's
yes.
an associate. Yes.
It's an associate. Who is here from AEEI?
The Chief Executive, Mr. Abdullah, is here.
Thank you. Please continue.
IO is an information and communication technology company that provides end-to-end solutions to a diverse range of clients. Over the last 20 years, IO has become one of the foremost black empowerment ICT companies in South Africa and maintains a strong international footprint. Mr. Commissioner, this is one of the few companies in this country that when it says it's going to deliver, it delivers, because it takes pride of black excellence in particular. And so every single thing that this company has done through all of its subsidiaries, it has delivered an added value to contracts in both the private and public sector. IO has significantly grown its business in South Africa and abroad by acquiring new businesses and forging partnerships. Further, IO, through its divisions, subsidiaries and partners, has strong relationships and holds key value-added reseller or supplier agreements with multinational companies, such as Nokia. This is independent of the Second Jala Group. Siemens, again independent of the Second Jala Group. InterSystems Corporation, Cisco Systems, Microsoft Corporation, IBM, and Riverbed Technology Incorporation, which provides the group with continuous access to up-to-date and best practice technology. IO has and continues to have an alliance agreement with British Telecoms Communications South Africa, otherwise known as British Telecoms or BT.
Now, Dr. Survey, we're going to come later back to this alliance agreement with BT, British Telecommunications. I think it's important for this particular investigation. In your next paragraph, I don't want you to give more details than you've already furnished. Can you just read out IO's whole shareholdings in the entities? Just name the entities. That's all I want you to do.
IO is a shareholder in Saratoga Software, in AfriSAR, Worldwide Creative, Digital Matter, Health Systems Technologies, Headset Solutions, Puleng Technologies. So these are state-of-the-art, highly competitive, highly successful, highly profitable technology companies that IO is, in most instances, the majority shareholder of.
Paragraph 55.
Yeah, just a question. If maybe you could just summarize what these companies do without reading the statement. Dr. Sev, it's been a long time. I've been seeing you in a long time. Good morning.
Well,
good morning.
Good morning, Chief.
It's been a long time.
Good morning. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It really has.
Yes, yes.
If I may say, AfriSAR is one of the top software application companies in the world today. I say that because its applications are sold globally.
But just tell us, what is the application all about to us who are not literate in these matters?
Well, it builds software applications and software systems for systems integrations, in particular in the digital media space where it's become an expertise. Its content integration system has become world-class, and in fact is the basis on which we were able to compete with Reuters and Bloomberg. Everyone said we could not build a system to compete with Reuters and Bloomberg in the African News Agency. Well, they were wrong. South African developers, I'm very proud to say, we were able to build a system through AfriSAR that is able to filter content in a similar way as Reuters and Bloomberg, and we are now competing.
And those are the platforms on which brokers talk to one another.
No, sorry, those are not those. Okay, so what it means is that we have about 28 direct contractual relationships on the African continent with very prominent media houses, and by the end of this year we'll have 40. We have built an integrated platform that allows their content from their systems, whether you're in Ghana, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya, Mozambique, etc., to come into our systems. We have built algorithms in our systems which are artificial intelligence driven, which are able to filter this out, and then we're able to send it out globally to reach 1 billion users every day. And we are now, in terms of scaling up with Sagamata, when we go to New York, when we list there, the capital raise will be used to get the sales footprint out in the US and Europe and China and Asia, so that African content can now be given globally. Our concern was that it is foreigners that tell the story about Africa. And so we, when we acquired independent media, what we saw was that we paid about 200 million to syndication news content services such as Reuters, Bloomberg, AFP, AP, Xinhua, etc. I can go on and on and on. And I went to our people and our team and our leadership and developers.
I think that's okay. That's okay. And the others, do the others do the same thing?
No, it's very different. So, Mr. Commissioner, the one that I'm the most proud of, if I may say so, is the hospital information systems business. So, one of the challenges in the South African healthcare system is that our hospitals are chaotic, and it is the poor that use our hospitals, our public hospitals. And when they come there, x-rays are lost, results are lost, people have to repeatedly get so what we then did is we customized a global software system with our own software engineers in a company called HST, Health Systems Technologies, and we're able to now provide HIS systems, hospital information systems, which is optimized. And the irony is, I always say this, the irony is the one province which has probably got the best run hospitals in the country, it is because they use our hospital information systems. We've been so successful, we've expanded.
If I may just stop you, that's dealt with fully in 54.2. Okay.
But and just before that, which province are you talking about? Which is the province that uses
regrettably,
your
it's the DA province, the Commissioner. The Commissioner. So we make the DA look good because, ironically, it is the DA that saw, despite the fact they may not like me for political reasons,
let's leave the political part out of it.
Yes.
Can I then ask? It's the Western Cape that you
so, and we've also we in put in about 300 hospitals, and we're in other African states and also in the Middle East. Yeah.
Can I then, with the leave of the Commission, take you to 55, paragraph 55?
55. Oh yes. As at the 31st of August 2017, prior to IO's listing, it had a strong balance sheet, and this is important, positive cash flows, consolidated group turnover of 470 million, and a pre-tax profit of approximately 130 million. So, Mr. Commissioner, this is so important because people have said, the SABC, for example, said IO's turnover was 12 million. That's disgraceful.
Can I just ask you, as I understand the position, the interim results were released yesterday. As I understand the position, your profit has doubled.
Advocate Kasim, I was very busy in preparation and doing yoga in preparation for today's session with the Commission. So I did not have the opportunity to look in detail at the result. But what I saw very quickly, if I may, was that IO's revenue had increased by almost 100%. Its profitability for the 6 months only, by the way, had shot up to something like pre-tax profit of 300 million. Its asset base, by the way, has increased to 5.2 billion. And if I was to project, just if I may, if I was to project, Mr. Commissioner, based on my understanding of finance, I expect IO to probably have revenue of 2 billion for this year and profitability close on to 800 million for this year. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm simply suggesting that if I use my calculations, which is based on forecasting just from my own information, from no other information, that in fact puts IO in line with its forecast in its PLS without having spent hardly any of its capital. I mean, that is remarkable that a black company is able to achieve this level of profitability.
Fine. I then would ask you to just confirm what's set out in 56. IO and its companies and its associates employ some 1,400 people.
That is correct. So we employ about, well, IO employs about 1,400 people, and I'm delighted that top of the management team is black, and it's part of our process of upskilling black ICT people. We have a training academy, we have all of these things, etc. We are committed to the development of our country, and in particular, black talent in our country. We are non-racial, just to be clear. We are absolutely a non-racial company. The foundation of our company is non-racial, but we do not apologize for the fact that in order to overcome the effects of apartheid, we have to promote, skill up, and invest in particular in black youth and in black talent in all of our companies. And so I can say that black women, our company, black women occupy the most top positions in any other company. And I'm very proud of that, Mr. Commissioner.
We now deal with the commencement of the engagement process between IO and the PIC, and paragraph 57. Can you read that into the record?
I am informed by the chairperson of IO, Mr. Advocate Wallace Mgorki, and the CEO of AEI, Mr. Abdullah, that the engagement process with the PIC was as follows. The listing process for IO had been envisioned as part of the AEI 5-year strategic plan, which was presented to analysts every year, labeled Vision 2020. As explained, AEI is a diversified investment group, has investments in various industries and sought to grow its investment through public offerings in order to scale and create employment opportunities for South Africa. AEI successfully listed its fishing and aquaculture business in early 2017, and invested the capital raised in expanding its aquaculture business and acquiring other fishing companies. To date, it has utilized the capital for its intended purpose and has provided its shareholders with significant operational growth, profits and dividends.
Question? Are there people around from, from Premier Fishing, like Mr. Mgoki? Is there Mgoki?
Advocate Mgoki has an engagement. I think is an acting judge with the Land Bank, but he was hoping to be here today, but okay. I think is only coming.
Yeah. Whenever you refer to names, if they are, within the building, just indicate so that we see the faces.
Advocate Mgoki is in the... He did tell me that...
it's fine. I just say whenever you go through... whenever you go through the names.
I will.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You at paragraph 59.
I think I just read that one. So maybe paragraph 60?
My apologies, paragraph 60, yes.
During 2017, and coming from a successful fishing listing, the board of AEI turned its focus to building and listing its IT segment. At the time, the board of AEI was chaired by Reverend Vukuli Charles Mahana, who unfortunately is not here today. The climate in this period started to favor BE groups in the ICT sector. IO acquired excellent businesses at lower than market multiples during the 2017 period, more than doubling its revenues from this. However, even though the investment structures had excellent payback periods and structures, sourcing of bank funding as an empowerment player continued to be a challenge. Most black businesses in this country do not have the networks which white businesses have, and therefore cannot access the capital. And I can expand some more on that. We can go into the statistics of it, Mr. Commissioner. Very happy to do so if you would like me to.
Not at this stage.
Thank you. Okay. It was clear to achieve scale and mass, the group would have to accelerate the listing process to source capital. AI has multinational investments where it's been a long-standing empowerment partner, one of them being British Telecoms. BT customers were coming under pressure to procure from more black-empowered ICT businesses. As time passed, one of BT's primary customers, Sasol, had been significantly impacted by the changes to the empowerment codes and requested its 7 largest ICT providers to develop a structure that would assist them. If BT could develop a structure with a true black empowerment ICT partner, not fronting, it could benefit from an extended 7-year contract being awarded to Sasol. The CEO
at Sasol. Sasol will give the contract to BT.
That is correct. The CEO of BT and the AI board representatives were advised that if BT could use a majority black-owned ICT business with black women ownership, strong black strong track record, broad products and services and customer base, it would be a front runner as these credentials were not easily sourced in the South African ICT landscape. AI then presented IO, then Technology Solutions Limited, to the BT team. This was strategically beneficial for all as they were common shareholders. By this I mean the British AI already owned through a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary, 30% of British Telecom SA, of which I, until December last year, Mr. Commissioner, was the chairman for the last 8 years or so.
So you were the chairman of British Telecommunications, and at the same time you had an indirect interest in controlling power in AEEI.
That is correct. It's very unusual for multinationals to appoint you as chairman of their boards. They normally appoint you as deputy chairmen in countries that they have a significant interest in. In my case, I was asked by the BT CEO to become the chairman of the Southern African business. Okay. However, IA would require capital to expand its offering and take over certain of BT's divisions directly. Considering how difficult it was to source bank funding, especially if you're back with the 2017 acquisitions, the AEI board decided with the IO management to accelerate the listing process. A concurrent process was taking place at BT, and this was important to move away from geographical and regional focus to global industry vertical focuses. What this meant was that the top customers globally within certain industries would be focused on directly by BT, and it would partner or team local players for its smaller regional customer base. All the above then positioned AE and IO perfectly to capture much greater market share within South Africa. The accelerated customer take-on process of this scale would require significant capital. Kevin Hardy, the then BT CEO, was positioned to move over to IO in order to transition of the BT divisions to IO and activate the alliance agreement. This told you how serious BT is or was about the investment and the business with IO, that its CEO was in fact to come over to IO, the setup of which would require capital. It made sense to consolidate all ICT investments under a single company, and hence the decision for AI to sell its 30% investment in BT to IO. This investment, as is required by JSE regulations, was in fact valued by an independent JSE-approved value Quest. We're happy to provide the Commission the details of that valuation from Quest. AI have to add to this for value, as BT had showed significant growth over time, and was a fully paid up investment. And I want to add, if I may, Mr. Commissioner, this is unusual about the Second Jala Group. As a group, we have no debt. As a group, we only have significant dividends. As a group, we are unique in the South African corporate space, unlike Steinhoff that has 200 billion debt, EOH that has tens of billions of debts, MTN and others, etc.
Mr. Survey, then insofar as what's relevant for this purpose is AEI was prepared to sell its stake to IO. It was valued at R1 billion. Is that correct?
I think if AEI had their way, they may not wanted to have sold it, but they did because they wanted to give the benefit to IO and the PIC. Because by doing that, significant business that would have come to AEI even today, as you can see in the results today that was published, has gone to IO. And the value of IO has increased substantially. The profitability has increased substantially because of those alliance agreements.
And we're going to come to the detail because it's very important as to the benefit IO got in the relationship, because as I understand it, the income stream of AEI now comes into IO.
Well, the truth, no. The dividends, because AEI is the shareholder in BT, the dividends go to AEI. But the other income streams in relation to the alliance agreements and the material contracts, which was the basis of all of us, is today in IO. And the thing is that IO did not pay a cent for it.
Sorry, that's the point.
Did not pay a cent for it.
No,
so there's significant profitability that has gone into the business for the benefit of all shareholders, including the PIC.
Can you then turn to paragraph 64?
The ability, 64. The listing would have two primary competitive advantages: empowered ownership and a global alliance with a multinational operating in 43 countries. Mr. Commissioner, the IP, the Network Global Solutions, this is not easy to get if you're a South African company. BT has 3,000 people in the R&D division in different parts of the world. And therefore, to get the latest technologies and the latest network solutions, to be able to offer this to your customers as an integrated solution for large global corporates is very important. So the importance of that relationship cannot be, and that is not a relationship based on shareholding. That's the agreement, the alliance agreement that has been signed between the various parties.
64.2.
The ability by black empowered company to service large-scale local corporates. Mr. Commissioner, regrettably, the ICT sector in this country is lily white. There is hardly a major black presence. This is, of course, as a result of apartheid. And it's important for black ICT companies to grow. Part of our philosophy is not just that we, through IO, grow the ICT business, but we create an ecosystem for small black ICT entrepreneurs, as we have concretely done, to come into our system as well.
I think you have made statements to that effect already, so I think we need to go ahead.
Yes. In paragraph 65, you deal with early meetings between AEEI representatives.
In or about 2017, meetings took place between AI representatives and IO representatives and BT suppliers and subcontractors who could benefit from this model, becoming part of IO's then acquisition pipeline. This acquisition pipeline required acquisition capital.
Yes. I then want to take you to paragraph 70, because I think in your discussion you've covered the nub of the remaining paragraphs. Go to paragraph 70.
The groundwork for the listing had been built over time from the inception of the 2020 plan of AEI. Also, IO previously, Sekonjalo Technology Solutions, and before that, Sekonjalo Healthcare was already a public company, and the required legalities were set in place to enable a more efficient listing. The other advantages of using this investment holding company vehicle was that it had more than 1,000 external shareholders, which would unlock significant value and assist IO in achieving JSE requirements without diluting the BE status at listing.
Okay, then you deal with the details of the listing, but turn to paragraph 74.
During October 2017, the first formal engagement took place between the PIC and IO. October 2017, I stress. A meeting occurred between IO and the PIC, led by Mr. Fidelis Madavo and other members of the listed equities team. At the meeting, IO discussed the formation of the largest black ICT company in the country that would target just 3 to 5% of the market share. Very realistic.
And then in paragraph 75.
Can you please read paragraph 72? 72. Yep.
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, the listing team of advisors, which were then included PSG, sponsors, Weber Wenzel, and later TGR Legal, BDO auditors, and AEI corporate finance advisors. The listing project set a firm timetable on the 12th of October 2017. PSG was responsible for project timelines with the full team holding a detailed consolidated meeting on a weekly basis. These meetings were held to ensure all JSE and other listing requirements were considered, with PSG as the JSE liaison, keeping on constant contact with the regulator.
Okay. Thanks.
Can you then turn to paragraph 76?
This culminated in a detailed presentation by the AEI corporate finance team and IO executives on the 16th of November 2017. It is understood that the following occurred at that meeting. IO provided insight into its planned listing. The input yielded positive feedback from the PIC representatives of the portfolio management team for listed equities.
And then in paragraphs, so I take it, can I just clarify one aspect? In the meetings between PIC and IO, were you present?
No, not at all.
Did you participate
Not
in
at
any
all.
of those meetings?
Not at all.
Why not?
Well, frankly speaking, I'm not on the board. I'm not part of the directors of the company or the management team. I'm an investor. I'm no different to other large-scale investors in the South African economy.
Yes.
Mr. Kasim, since you are going to start with the pre-listing statement part of it, would this not be convenient to take the luncheon adjournment?
As you please.
Yes. Till 2 o'clock? Make it 2 o'clock. We'll adjourn until 2 o'clock. Thank you.